Whether by PC pod or pad, you are listening to Paid to Play. I am Rob Farker, your host for this exploration of the dangerous idea that putting your whole self, especially the bits of you that you worry make you seem silly, geeky, or even odd, into your income-generating life is one of the best things you can do. It might not be easy, but it is easier than we think and even fear. And with the help of my guest in this episode, I'd like to show you how. Now, unless you have been living under a rock for the past decade or so, you will know that superhero movies are all the rage. And if you've been keeping an eye on pop culture in general, you might also know what a big deal cosplay is right at the moment. I've had the pleasure of interviewing several cosplayers over the past year, but both phenomena all started from comic books. In this episode, it is my pleasure to chat with a gentleman who is not only an industry professional, but proof that nowadays geography is no limit to achieving your dream job. Wayne Nichols is an acclaimed Australian comic book artist. He is best known for his work in the US comic books industry, illustrating titles for the current powerhouse in comic book multimedia, Marvel Comics. He has illustrated issues of The Incredible Hulk, as well as the XMen spin-off X-Files. The production team of the Paid to Play podcast would like to apologise to our audience for the egregious error the host just made. We understand that the spin-off title from the X-Men comic book series is not entitled X-Files, it is entitled Exiles. The audience can rest assured that the host is currently strapped into a chair being forced to watch the Star Wars Holiday Special on infinite repeat. We now return you to your scheduled episode. He has also worked for many other comic book imprints. He had the good fortune to introduce a new clone of Tatiana Maslany in the Orphan Black tie-in comic book Orphan Black Helsinki, published by IDW Publishing, before the character even appeared on the show. He has also worked for Dark Horse Comics on their Star Wars The Force Unleashed and Falling Skies tie-in comic books, and Radical Comics on such titles as FVZA, Rider on the Storm, and Abattoir. On top of all that, Wayne is also a commercial illustrator. He regularly contributes illustrations, concept art and storyboards for a list of leading Australian and international clients, including H&M, Apple Music, MTV, Jacobs Creek, Crown Casino, Coca-Cola, MasterCard, the Australian Air Force and Telstra, amongst others. Born on the cusp of Cancer and Gemini on the 22nd of June, Wayne currently resides in sunny Brisbane, Australia, and ventures forth for various conventions across the country. It was a privilege and pleasure to meet him at Tropicon last year, and it's great to have him on the Paid to Play podcast. Wayne, thank you very much for your time and for coming on the show.
Thanks, Rob. It's good to be here.
Imagine that once this podcast chat wraps up, I give you a magic ticket. The magic ticket is good for the opportunity to do one thing that you have been itching to get back to, plus a rearrangement of your schedule as necessary to give you the time you need to do that one thing. What would be on your shortlist?
That's a really interesting question. Probably at the top of the list would be to get back to doing comics just for me. So to produce a graphic novel or more of stories that I've kind of had under wraps since the start of my career. But all the commercial work that I've been doing pretty much takes up all of my time these days. So it would be jumping probably straight into doing. I've got two projects. So one was Black Sunday, which is like a sci-fi type story. I'd probably set to work doing that, and another one was under the working title of Rumours of Whitmore. It's a similar kind of sci-fi type story. Yeah, and I would just jump into doing them full time. I mean, even if I wasn't doing comics as a career, I would spend probably most of my time drawing and doing comics and writing stories anyway, I think.
Fantastic. So definitely a passion all around for you.
Yeah, I mean, as far back as I can remember, I've been, specifically drawing, and the storytelling kind of thing came later. But yeah, it's just been something I've done as a hobby my whole life, and I've just been fortunate enough to turn it into a career.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. How did you? Well, when did you actually first sort of pick up a pencil, or when did you, after just having drawn for ages, kind of come to that realization that it was your thing and that you wanted to pursue it?
Well, for me, it was I was studying graphic design at it was just after high school, so I was studying graphic design at a college on the Gold Coast, and I had met I had started hanging out with a friend there who knew a guy who locally he would put out his own comic books. He just self-published them, and it was a sort of a low-level self-publishing, so he'd just sort of photocopy them up and staple them up and put them out in the comic shops. So he was friends with the guy who did that, and he started doing some stories in that guy's self-published book as well. And I was always a huge fan of comics, throughout high school and then continuing on afterwards. And I'd been drawing the whole time. And it was when I met this guy, I realized that it was maybe there was an opportunity there to start creating my own characters and start telling my own stories as well. Because I was invited by this other guy that I'd met. He asked if I wanted to contribute something to his comic. So I created a character, and I think I had just a pin-up in the. I don't remember exactly. I think maybe it was just a pin-up in the one of the issues of his comic that he was self-publishing. And then it just kind of went from there. I just kept making up stories. I collaborated with that same friend. I came up with a story that was basically superheroes in Brisbane. It was called The Protectrix. And we did the same kind of thing. We printed up our own comic and put it out in the local Brisbane comic shops, and just kind of went from there.
So from the sounds of it, the ideas that you've got that you'd like to explore if you had the spare time have been things that have occurred to you since then. Would the Protectrix be something that you'd go back to if you had the chance, or
probably not? It's, when I look back at it now, it was very much influenced by the things that I was into at the time, which were as different as, say, Hellboy, which was in its early stages, but getting very popular at the time, and also a book called Kingdom Come that Alex Ross and Mark Waid did.
Oh yes, got that one on the shelf.
Yeah, fantastic book, that one. And so that was kind of my influences at the time. So I wasn't a big superhero guy, but I took there was a certain maturity or a certain sort of different take on superheroes that Alex Ross was doing at the time with Marvels and Kingdom Come. So I tried to apply that to this idea of superheroes in Brisbane.
Yeah.
Which I don't know that there's any call for superheroes in Brisbane, really. But at the time, yeah, it seemed like a great idea, but I don't think I'd go back to that now, because it was an idea of a very young man, and your ideas and your concepts and things kind of change and evolve throughout time. So the things that I do now are very different to what I would have come up with back then.
Yeah. So you approached your friend, you got involved with his self-published comic book. Where did things go from there? And what were some of the things, I guess, you learned in those initial stages?
Well, I learned how to tell a story. It was a really interesting experience of just figuring out, okay, what does it take to tell your own story? Because, I mean, a lot of what I know I've learned just through reading comic books and studying them. But you really have to get in there and do it yourself to figure out what your kind of take is on storytelling. So what did I do after that? It's just such a long time ago. It's hard to it's like trace that memory back.
Yeah.
I think that was probably, I mean, that was kind of early days of the internet. So I think back then I had started doing up maybe samples of, well, I probably got the idea that, I reckon maybe I'm good enough that I could take a crack at getting work in the US market. Because as far as I knew, there wasn't really much going on in Australian comics. I didn't really aspire to work in Australian comics. I didn't really read any of the Australian comics. But I was a big fan of a lot of the English and the American stuff. So I think that was the point where or maybe like a few years down the track from that, I started posting samples online and getting in touch with just, through like IRC and like chat programs like IRC and ICQ and chatting with creators over in America. So I believe I got in touch with a few of them, and that led to some, I guess my first published work on a book called Archean with some guys over in the States. And I did a couple of books with guys over in the States until I actually very unfortunately got ripped off by one or two of the publishers in the States, which really cheesed me off at the time. And I just went, I can't do this because if I'm going to get ripped off, there's no career in it.
Yeah.
So basically, at that point, I gave up the idea of doing comics. But I was... Oh, yeah, sorry, go on.
I was about to say, I mean, that sort of experience, it does seem, as you say, it would be one hell of a blow, especially when you're doing something very creative, and even if you're doing it for someone else, a lot of it still comes very much from you, and then to be taken advantage of. But it of course, I mean, looking now, you did recover from it, but how long did it take you to kind of get back on the horse there?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, I was just so cheesed off because I had nothing that I could do about it. That I'd sent my artwork off, assuming that the stuff was going to get published and I was going to get paid, and then it happened with these two different publishers, and they just kind of disappeared, and I never heard from them again. Yeah. So I guess fortunately at the time I was very into music. And I was playing in a band with some friends, and I thought I was going to be a musician potentially. I thought I was going to be a rock star or something.
Yeah.
I was really, really into music. I would spend, similar to the way I spend all my time doing artwork. I was spending weekends and all my time like obsessing about music and composing music and I was playing in a band that was kind of like Nine Inch Nails meets Tool meets Aphex Twin or something. It had a lot of sort of electronic elements, and I was doing a lot of the synthesizer stuff as well as a bit of the bass guitar.
Right.
So I just jumped into that, and at the time I was working at a Sizzler restaurant, so I just kept on working at a Sizzler restaurant and doing that. And it's funny because all throughout that period I was working as a chef in this restaurant, and when I got my first comic gigs I quit working at Sizzler thinking, this is it, I'm going places. And because I did a couple of projects, and the first few, they got published and it was cool, but then I kind of got ripped off and went, screw this, I'm gonna do music now. So we'll see where that leads me. And I think I stopped drawing really for a few years there. So that was around the age of like 21. Stopped drawing for a few years. Yeah.
Well, playing in a band that has Nine Inch Nails and Tool as its inspirations, I would think that would be one great place to vent your angst and anger about that whole situation,
Oh yeah. Perfect. I mean, that's just been my thing with music. I mean, I've always had very diverse tastes, but I've always been into quite extreme styles as well. I mean, maybe that's part of it. It's a good way to sort of vent frustration. I'm not sure. I try not to think about it too much, but it just seems to be one of my interests, really extreme types of music.
Yeah.
But it was good for a few years, and then I guess like by way of getting back into artwork, I had seen a job offered in the newspaper somewhere, I think it was, and it was for someone working in games, and I assumed it was computer games, and when I actually went for the job interview, it turned out it was like poker machines, like gaming machines. Which was, I was quite let down initially.
I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I was huge into computer games growing up, and then when it didn't turn out to be that, I was going to, But I got the job, and then that led to like 5 years of working for this company designing poker machines.
At least that was a decent job that allowed you to practice your skills. But look, quick geek out diversion has to be done.
Yeah,
Favourite games growing up? Come on, Wayne, what were they?
Well, for me, it was all about the Commodore Amiga computer systems. So, yeah, I played a bit of Commodore 64 before that, but it was mainly on the Amiga. And our favourite games, I don't know. I guess you would have, played the same kind of things, possibly. So it was games like Speedball and Xenon 2 and Lemmings and,
Lemmings brings back memories, yes.
Yeah, just hours and hours watching those little like building the things for the lemmings to jump off.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And watching them all fall off the bottom of the screen going, no!
Yeah, it was awesome. But even back then, a big part of it was creativity. So there was an early programming language called Amos, I think. And you could buy this software package that allowed you to make your own games on the Amiga. And my brother had bought that software package, and I used to go in there and redesign characters in the games. I would never got into coding or any like the programming side of things, but I would go in and I would alter the graphics to the characters and turn them into my own characters or try to copy characters that I had seen in like arcade games. Which at the time they were like much more graphically advanced than what the home computers were. Mm. So I would go in there and kind of create my own characters, and it's interesting because I think back on that and I see how it was all about kind of creating things, and that's sort of been my driving thing my whole life is creativity.
Mm. Mm. Now, you mentioned, of course, that you did do 5 years working on art for poker machines. What was that 5-year stretch like? How did you come out at the end of it?
It was actually a really positive experience. We had as I said at the start, it wasn't exactly what I expected it was going to be. But we had a really cool team of artists that I was working with, and it was just a cool work environment. I mean, we had this massive workspace with a ping pong table set up, and then, I was playing bass guitar at the time. I wasn't really playing in the band anymore, but I still used to practice every now and again. Mm. And I had a mate that I was working with who played guitar, and another mate who played drums. So, like at lunchtime, we'd get together and have little jams. It was kind of like the idea, and then go back and do some drawing on these designs for these poker machines. So it was kind of like the ideal workplace. Yeah, it was quite surreal to think back on it now.
Wow.
But the best part of it was deadlines were such that they allowed us plenty of time, because all of the artists working there were we were all kind of fledgling artists. We were sort of working out what our style was, and we were given enough time to develop as artists, and that was probably the best thing because it allowed me to improve on the job. Not a lot of people are that fortunate that they get to spend the time working somewhere and get paid, but also be allowed enough time to kind of improve while they're doing it. Mm. So yeah, it was a really good experience. I look back on it quite fondly.
Fantastic. I mean, let's face it, right at the moment, poker machines, and probably, for a long while, they've not exactly got what you'd call a great reputation socially, but it's, it's fantastic to at least hear that there was that side to it that was very, encouraging and nurturing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to say that I never got hooked on playing poker machines through that. So, if anything, it turned me off the whole concept.
So, look, you did that 5-year stint. What came next after that? I mean, how did it end? Did the job wind up, or did another opportunity come up that you pursued?
Well, I mean, I could probably still be working there today if I hadn't. All throughout that time, I'd been getting the itch to do comics again. So, I mean, every day on the job, sitting there drawing, that made me realise that my passion was in comics and in the storytelling. And obviously, I didn't get to do a lot of that on the job with doing poker machines.
No.
So, I saw a grant application in a library, I think, for a thing called a Creative Sparks grant that Queensland puts out to support like fledgling and up-and-coming artists. So I had applied for that, and I got the grant, and that was to fund this one of my graphic novels. So I got that, and also I think at the time I'd started submitting. It was kind of like the process before. When I got the jobs on some of those early comic books, I'd started posting samples of my work online, and I got some work offers. Just from some smaller publishers, and then I got in contact by Rob Liefeld, of all people.
Wow!
I don't know. You know who he is, yeah.
Yes.
Obviously, yeah, the guy who created Deadpool. That's what he's kind of known for at the moment.
Yeah. I've got to admit, I have seen a little bit of his stuff. I remember back when I was kind of as heavy as I ever got into comic books. For a while there, I think he founded his own imprint, and I'd known he'd been in the industry for a while. And sad to say it, the guy has a reputation for a certain art style that people find quite easy to mock. But, I remember, one of the things I kind of remember him for was, for all things, doing covers when he had his imprint going, of when they had the rights to Battlestar Galactica, and seeing his takes on the classic 70s characters 20 years on. And that would have been,
that would have been, I don't know, that would have been a weird kind of mix, like Liefeld and Battlestar Galactica.
Yes,
it probably goes together pretty well. Yeah,
it certainly does. I mean, I've got to admit, I don't think Lieutenant Sheba from Battlestar Galactica ever looked quite as curvy as she did when Rob was doing the covers of it. But but I mean, that's a fantastic in to the industry when Rob Liefeld gets in touch with you. I mean, wow,
it was quite a cool thing, because it, in a way, it sort of validated that I was on the right track, you know. He had seen I think I had started posting on various different forums as well, and I may have posted on his, and he liked my stuff enough to hire me for a Lady Supreme story, which is one of his characters that he had created at Image Comics. So I had started drawing that. Unfortunately, that project didn't pan out. It kind of fizzled like halfway through, so it never got published. But there was a nice little promo boost for me at the time, because he posted samples of my work on his website and did like a write-up, you know, check out Wayne Nichols, you know, upcoming new talent, blah, 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 you know, talking me up. So I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is going to take me places. But yeah, as I said, unfortunately didn't kind of pan out. I mean, Rob's sort of known for jumping from one project to another, you know, kind of putting out. I mean, I don't know so much these days, but back then he'd put out like a lot of sort of #1 issues, it seemed like, and then just sort of disappear or launch something else. And, obviously, #1s sell a lot, you know, so you keep. That's why all the companies keep rebooting their titles.
Of course.
Yeah. So so that then just led to more work, and then maybe a year or so later, I was just doing jobs here and there, you know, sort of horror stuff or the occasional superhero story. So it led to enough work that it kept me going. And at the same time, I was trying to do this graphic novel of mine that I got the grant for. So it was kind of like, it's been my whole career, like juggling multiple projects at once. And then I decided I need to go over to San Diego to the Comic-Con over there and do a bit of networking, get in touch with the publishers and editors of the companies, and really try to connect with them over there and get some serious work. So I did that, and that's what led to the first big work that I did for Dark Horse and Marvel. It was going over there and meeting with the editors.
I remember seeing a documentary that I think was put out a couple of years ago, which was this, it was basically about Comic-Con. And I didn't see the whole thing, but I did kind of come in a little bit toward, I think, just after the start of the second half.
Yep.
And one of the things they were focusing on was this kind of open call
Right.
that they do for comic book artists. And with all these people coming in with portfolios and samples of their work and basically sitting down with representatives of the various publishing houses and imprints, and that process of pitching, of review and feedback, and it was fantastic to watch, a very interesting little process. So I can sort of see in my mind what that must have been like. But yeah, I guess that was the first time. Was that the first time for you out of the country as well, or? No.
Well, one of the cool things in that job doing the poker machines is they supplied a lot of the machines to the European market. So I had done like a 5-week sort of work exchange program in Austria back then, and I travelled to the US once or twice before. So no, it wasn't a new experience.
No,
but it was good. It was a really good experience because it led to that work, and at the same time it was kind of like a holiday. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we did land in San Francisco, and then we did like the convention in San Diego, and we visited Disneyland in Anaheim, and then drove over to Las Vegas, and it was a pretty epic sort of holiday as well as convention experience.
Fantastic. So just in case we missed it, what were the opportunities? What came out of that? What was the first gig that you got?
Oh, okay. So I had met with editors at Marvel and DC and Dark Horse, and they all seemed to like my stuff. And it was either a Marvel gig or a Dark Horse gig. It was probably the Marvel gig. So I had got in touch with C.B. Sobolski, who's like one of the talent scouts at Marvel, and emailed him when I got back to Australia. And so that led to a job on an Exiles book, which is an XMen spin-off, and then a Hulk book. And with the Dark Horse one, it was a few months, I think, until I heard from Randy Stradley, who's the creative director at Dark Horse. I hadn't heard anything, so I didn't think I was necessarily going to hear anything from Dark Horse. But a few months down the track, out of the blue, he emailed and kind of apologized for it being so long, and said that he's got this Star Wars book that needs an artist for. Would I be interested? And of course, I'm like, yeah, of course I'm interested. And I guess I had an availability at the time, so I went on and did The Force Unleashed for Dark Horse.
Which, of course, was kind of a big deal at the time, because for those of you in the audience who might not know, Star Wars: The Force Unleashed was a pretty big Star Wars based video game that came out a few years back, where you got to play as this character who was billed as Darth Vader's secret apprentice. So there was lots of lightsaber action, and funnily enough, speaking of Battlestar Galactica, the lead character in it, the character of Vader's Secret Apprentice, was voiced, and I think by kind of coincidence, the art design that was done for him wound up being a spitting image of an actor who worked on the new series of Battlestar Galactica from a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
I'm blanking on his name, but he was the guy who played Crashdown. One of the Raptor crew from the show.
Okay.
But,
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well. But, look, slight geek digression there. But anyway, so yes, you got this gig. And now, when you say you worked on these books, how many issues are we talking about? Because a comic book, of course, is about 20 or 30 pages long, including ads. But, usually, it's like there are multiple story arcs over a given year. which, I mean, from my experience of reading comic books, can usually be somewhere between 5 and 10 issues long. So how much when you say you worked on a book, how many actual issues did you do?
It was fairly brief. So the Marvel stuff was one issue of Exiles. The Hulk was one issue, and Dark Horse was, I think it was the equivalent of one issue. It was part of a graphic novel with 2 other artists. So it was, the equivalent of one issue.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like fill-in spots from the sounds of it when the usual. Now this would have been penciling, right? If we're talking in the comic book art creation process.
Yeah, all of those jobs were penciling.
So, I mean, I guess from the sounds of it, sort of fill-ins while the regular penciler was unavailable, or just sort of one-shot stories as fill-ins kind of thing?
I think that's more or less what it was. It seems to be something they do fairly commonly with new talent or untested talent. They kind of get them in and try them out on a book here or there, and that potentially leads to more work or doesn't lead to more work. So. I think that's pretty much how it goes, yeah.
Yeah. And I was just about to ask about the pressure of working on Star Wars Force Unleashed, but for crying out loud, you were working on an Incredible Hulk title and an XMen, a title that's part of the XMen family. So, working on those straight off the bat, was there this sense of, oh, holy shit, I really cannot screw this up kind of thing?
Yeah, there was a little bit of that, but I didn't feel especially pressured. I mean, I know working on the Star Wars one, it was really interesting because my brother, Adam, works in computer games as a concept artist, he was working at Chrome Studios at the time, and they were the ones creating the Force Unleashed game. So there was a bit of a family connection there, and if there were any sort of... Oh, excuse me, that's my phone.
No worries.
If there are any spots where I didn't have reference for backgrounds or characters, that type of thing, I could ask him and see if he had any kind of reference material that he could throw my way from all the stuff that they were working on.
Wow.
So, that sort of took a lot of the pressure off. It was more with Marvel. It was more just kind of excitement of having an opportunity to kind of work on the Hulk and work on those kind of classic characters. It didn't lead to a lot of more work at Marvel, so it was a fairly short thing. So it wasn't really enough time to feel a lot of pressure, I guess.
Yeah,
I was more excited. I mean, I remember. Getting access to the Marvel FTP site where you upload all the artwork and seeing all these artists' names in there, like Travis Charest and Adam Kubert and all these guys whose artwork I've loved and grown up with, and their little folders where they upload their artwork for use. It was a pretty exciting thing to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I guess it must be helpful thing to be able to see the artwork in the state that they uploaded in before it then gets inked and coloured and goes through the rest of that process between creating the pencils and it winding up on the page in an issue of a comic book.
Yeah, I don't know actually, because I didn't go into their folders and I didn't go through their folders and go, ooh, what goodies have they got in here? I thought about it, but I was like, that's pretty poor form.
Right.
Do that. And everyone uploads so much of their artwork, in pencil form or just inks form. I mean, especially these days, like if you follow your favorite artists on Facebook, everyone is posting photos of work in progress stuff. So, I didn't really feel like I needed to kind of go through their folders. It was just cool enough to see my name in there as part of that.
Yeah. So did you get to have that sort of wonderful moment where you got to go into your comic book store and say and tell the owner that yes, you're here to pick up the latest issue of the X-Files of Exiles or the Incredible Hulk, and you've heard good things about this new penciler who's on the title. You might want to take a look at it and you know, say, oh, okay, really, yeah, bullshit, Wayne, that's not you. Yeah,
Yeah.
did you sort of get to milk that moment at all, or?
I probably did a little bit of that, but I never really had I mean, it's different now. I know some of the comic shop owners in Brisbane now, but at the time, I wasn't really frequenting comic shops, which is interesting because I was, really wanting to, working in comics and wanting to kind of further my career, but I wasn't going into a lot of comic shops. I did it heaps when I was younger, but through that period, I wasn't going to comic shops a lot. So I'm pretty sure I would have gone in there. But I don't have a specific memory of going in there and kind of rubbing in their faces or whatever, you know. Or saying, hey, remember me? Or, you know. I didn't have that kind of relationship with any of the comic shop owners who could go in there and say, hey, mate, like, check it out. But I'm sure I would have. I mean, I certainly, showed my friends and, anyone that and my brother Adam, we kind of talked about it and stuff, obviously.
Yeah. Okay, well, now there's one thing, we've talked a lot about comic books so far. Tell me a little bit about the other aspect of your visual art career as an illustrator and a storyboardist. So how did that kind of line of work come about? I mean, it sounds like a natural extension of the work that you were doing when you were working for the poker machine company. But how did that sort of continue on?
Yeah, it's that's a good kind of tie-in there. I'm not sure how related they are, but that came about when I got in contact with the Drawing Book Studios, which is an art studio based in Sydney that does a lot of that type of work. And I was looking to supplement the comic book work that I was doing with something else, and it seemed like storyboards and concept art was the perfect thing. And I was getting jobs here and there, but I thought it'd be nice to get in contact with a studio here in Australia that specifically, does that kind of work, and to have them representing me. So I emailed, I think it was one of the owners of the Drawing Book Studios, and he emailed me back within the hour, I think it was, with this email saying, Wayne, this stuff's amazing. Get in touch with me ASAP. And it was actually really weird at the time because I had the flu and I'd lost my voice. So I remember going, I better call this guy. And I call him and I'm like, hello, how you doing? And my voice was just not there. And while I'm talking to him, I can hear him saying, hey, Wayne. And I can hear the tone in his voice of what the hell is wrong with this guy? He's got something wrong with him? Oh no. So then I just explained that I'd lost my voice kind of thing, but it was a weird little introduction to the, the people of the Drawing Book Studios. So that then, they liked my stuff, and I just did some samples for them, and then went to working on, some of these gigs through them. So a lot of that storyboard work that I do is they source the work from the big clients, and then get in contact with me, and I draw it basically.
Speaking of storyboarding, there does seem to be kind of at the moment a semi-cynical approach to comic books, especially as they are pop culture big media darlings right at the moment. Some artists tend to view comic books as storyboards for potential movies, undercover, if you know what I mean. And I remember listening to an interview with, I think it was Mark Miller, who sort of got a name for himself in the broader industry, especially after I think it's 2 kick-ass movies that were put out. And I watched this chat with him, and he kind of explicitly said that he and his creative partner were basically talking about ideas for movies that they were going to do next. And they realised that they wanted to do this concept that eventually became Kingsman: The Secret Service. Okay. And they basically said the first thing they did was they put out the comic book effectively as a first step to it getting the story concept getting seen and eventually adapted into this big budget film with, Colin Firth and Michael Caine and Samuel L. Jackson. From seeing it from both sides of the coin as a comic book illustrator, and having worked on a few things that are like cross-media works themselves, especially Orphan Black and Star Wars, and with that kind of perception that's out there, what's your feeling on the position of the comic book right at the moment in that broader cross-media scene that's everywhere at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I love comic book just for the combination of art and literature. So the pure comic book form, I love that, and I'm not a big fan of these kind of motion comics and things where they chuck in a little bit of sound effects and try to like animate them, because it just comes off as poor poor animations.
I've seen a few of those, and I've got to admit I've not been really impressed. It's this strange middle ground between being a cartoon or an animated work and a comic book. I mean, I've seen really poor ones. Like I remember somebody did one for the Predators movie.
Right, okay.
Which was really dodgy. And then there was there are some that aren't too bad, like some of the ones that they did for Halo and various projects, like adaptations of short stories. But they don't seem to have found some sort of comfort zone where it has its own strength, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I've seen some samples where they haven't been too bad, but in general it doesn't come off great. And I wonder if that's because we've been so heavily exposed to film being quite realistic or really well animated, and comics being completely, nothing moves on the page and you have total control of like moving backwards and forwards in the story. I wonder if we hadn't been exposed to that for such a long time, if seeing these motion comics would seem valid in its own right in a different way. Probably not, but I just wonder how like a younger person might view them, because I haven't really spoken to any about that. I'm curious.
Yeah, maybe it's just us old fogies who came up with the medium as it was, look
not
at
saying it like that, but I wonder if it's a matter of sort of a different kind of exposure to these things, and that's why we just see it as this kind of lame mashing together of the two things. It probably still would seem like that way to anyone, because like, I mean, poorly animated pictures look poor anyway.
Yeah.
So I love comic books, like, for that medium and what you can do with comic books, and, breaking things out of the panels and things that you can't obviously do, and having control of how you, like, view the page and just taking in the whole, like the page as a whole, and then obviously, like, you're meant to read Western comics left to right, but you can read it however you want, really. And just, the different sort of narrative things that you can do, play around with comics. So I love comics for that, but at the same time, I'm not like a comic purist, so I'm as much of a fan of film, as I am as comics. So, I think it's just smart, and makes business sense these days if you're going to come up with something to consider, cross-platform development, and where you could kind of take a project like that, unless you want to just be specifically comics or specifically animation or whatever, and that's cool as well. But it totally makes sense, because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to make money, that's the way to make money out of it, make it into a big film.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's cool either way.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about where you are right now, as a comic book artist and an illustrator. What is the experience of where you are right now like? People would probably look at your situation and think, you get to work on big deal comic books. You have worked for Marvel. You are currently working for one of the, I think a few years ago you probably would have considered them the scrappy up-and-comers, but they seem to have now carved themselves a niche on that tier just below Marvel and DC, standing shoulder to shoulder with veterans like Dark Horse Comics. I'm talking, of course, about IDW.
Yeah.
And, they look at your position there and think, you've made it. Life must be absolutely fantastic for you. What's the reality of doing the work you do on a daily and a weekly basis? And, the two aspects of it, the working on comic books and also still working as a commercial illustrator.
Well, it's something to... It has many layers to it. So there is a great joy that comes from working as an illustrator and getting to indulge, I guess, your childhood dream of just, drawing all the time. But at the same time, it's a job, and with any job, it has its trying moments. And one of the things about, I don't know how it is for all other illustrators, but for me, I'm very perfectionistic and kind of picky about my artwork, so I'll spend a lot of time tweaking it and trying to get it as good as I can. So a lot of the time it's fighting deadlines because they've got publishing schedules on these books, and you're told, you've got 5 days to do this X amount of pages, and for me, I love it, but one of the struggles that I'm constantly dealing with as weird as it is, because I could just bang out artwork that looks okay fairly quickly, but I'm always trying to up the game with my artwork. So the struggle is trying to meet the deadlines, but also improve my artwork. Well, not improve, but just sort of up the game and do the best artwork that I can every time. Mm. And it feels like it's always it's just one of the things that I'm always thinking about. It feels like it's always a losing game of getting the artwork to look as good as I want it to look, but meeting that deadline. So I always feel like it falls like at 80% or 70% or something. It never quite hits the mark of where I want it to be.
There are some who say that perfect is the enemy of good, and that sometimes if you concentrate too much on an ideal version of what you think your art ought to be, whether, as a general standard, and, of course you're an artist and you love the job you do, so of course you do want to improve and feel like you're learning, because that's one of the great joys of the thing. But then again, sometimes that very struggle to keep pushing and keep better can kill the thing that you love almost, because you keep just looking back at it and going, that's not good enough, instead of being able to at least do what you can in the time you have, and then let go of it and look back and say, you know what, it might not have been everything that I wanted it to be, but it was good.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, it's still a job, and you got to kind of disconnect any kind of personal feelings to it. But I think about it in a way like that's what the personal creative projects are for. Like, spend as much time as you want making them as perfect as you can, and then the other thing is a job. Try to do it as good as you can, but it's still they've got publishing schedules, so you got to get it out on time. I mean, I think about say like a filmmaker like Stanley Kubrick. I mean, he was notorious for spending years on shoots and doing reshoots and making actors do take after take until he got, because he had a specific personal vision of the way he wanted things to be. So he would do it over and over until he got something that was interesting enough to him. And it's one of the things that in doing commercial comics and having those deadlines that you don't have the time to do that. You have to, you get enough time to kind of race through a few ideas, but then you just have to pick one and go for it. And in that way, you can turn out some interesting stuff and stuff that's different to what you may have if you had labored over it. But I think it's just my personal preference would be for them to just pay me tons of money and just give me as long as I everyone loved that.
Yeah. So how do you manage your actual working schedule? Again, especially as you kind of have these two main streams of work that you're doing. How do you, what does your working week look like?
Well, I try to keep a 9 to 5 type work schedule, so I get social time or family time or friends time after hours, and that fits in with most people fairly normally. Yeah. I mean, I do end up working nights sometimes because that perfectionism and just wanting to and hitting deadlines and things, because doing comics is fairly work intensive. I guess it's one of the things that maybe people don't always realize is how much. I mean, it depends on the artist and the style of artwork, but doing sort of semi-realistic comics is a lot of like referencing and work involved. So yeah, I try to work a 9 to 5, and I get up in the morning, check my emails, and then get drawing basically, or make a phone call or whatever I need to do to figure out what I'm doing for the day or for the week, and get on with it.
So, from the sounds of things, between doing comics and doing your illustrating and storyboarding work, those two avenues, they're your job. They pay all your bills. Would that be right?
Yes, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All right, well, that means I can add you to my list of Venkmans. That is fantastic.
What is that?
Wayne, you shock me, sir. Do not tell me that you have not seen Ghostbusters.
No, I know Peter Venkman, but I'm just curious what the reference.
It just that wonderful bit where he and Ray Stantz are sitting on the steps of New York University just after being kicked out by the dean.
Oh,
and yes, so you know where I'm going now. Yeah. And Peter looks at Ray and says, I believe we were destined to kicked out of this dump. I believe this all happened for a purpose, to go into business for ourselves.
Yeah.
So I consider, as far as I'm
That's
concerned,
great.
yeah. So someone who's getting paid to play, fully self-employed, you're a Venkman in my book. You do it.
Winning your life. That's a pretty good, to be compared to Bill Murray. I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah. And let's face it, there is a guy, when it comes down to it, who's freely admitted he does work, he chooses his projects based on how interesting he finds them. So, bloody, good on him. But, sort of on a similar note, as well as, of course, paying all your bills, getting paid to make comic books has definitely opened up some other interesting doors for you, because, of course, we met at Tropicon, which was a local geek culture, pop culture convention in Cairns, and you have an appearance circuit at Supernova and various other conventions. I mean, was there ever a point where, you've told us about going to San Diego Comic Con, but before that, was that thing of going to conventions just as an attendee? And did you ever sort of, at the time, look at the people who would be up doing panels and signing comic books and that kind of thing, and, thinking, yeah, that'll be me someday?
I'm not sure that I ever sat there and thought that'll be me someday. I probably did. I don't remember a specific memory of thinking that. But yeah, I went to the Supernovas for a few years before I was invited as a guest. And for me, it was always cool to go and chat with some of the American creators that they had coming out, like David Finch and Lionel Francis Yu. And I bought some original artwork from them and had nice chats with them. And even some of the Australian creators that, like David Yarden, I think was a few years ahead of me. Having nice chats with guys like that. I've always been a fan, and that never really goes away. Because even, it's kind of like you're at the convention and you have certain responsibilities to be at your table and kind of signing things and selling things. But at the same time, you want to run around and check out everything. It's not a bad problem to have, but the whole fan thing never really goes away.
No. So, how did your first convention appearance? Did you put your name out there to convention organisers, or was it the case that one day you looked in your email inbox and all of a sudden there was this message from one of the guys who, one of the convention organisers saying, "Hey Wayne, can we get you along?"
I believe what it was, I was working on a book called Kate Lawson, which is kind of like the X-Files, but set in Australia, with a kind of a ghost hunter type character. And so I was doing that for an Australian publisher called Phosphorescent Comics. And I believe they got in touch with the Supernova organisers and said, should have this guy as a guest, I guess, basically.
Okay.
And so they then got in contact with me and offered me the guest spot.
Fantastic. So, and as you mentioned, being at a convention, you do want to get out there and have a look around yourself as much as you've got to be there as an invited guest and be appearing at your booth and on panels, etc. How do you get the chance to get out and wander the floor?
Yeah, I mean, every now and again I go for a wander and just check out what's around. It's pretty. It depends on how busy it is, really.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's one of those things for, say Jim Lee. He's obviously not going to get much time to go wandering around. He's probably going to get swamped by people when he goes wandering around at conventions.
No.
So it's a thing that probably relates to how much time you got at the convention. But yeah, I always try to get around and have a wander and check out. Have like just chats with other artists. How's it going? Just go and buy T-shirts or buy little bits of junk for like friends and partners and stuff like that.
So, what you've sent me in the information you sent me through before the chat, you've mentioned that there are a couple of projects coming up soon that you're keen to that you're working on at the moment. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. So I'm finishing off the work on Orphan Black fairly soon. I think I've got like 1 week left, and then it's jumping onto another project that I've been drawing sort of at the same time, which is called Time Change, and it's a book that deals with it deals with the concept of if you could go back in time and stop madmen throughout history from committing kind of horrific crimes, would you go and do that? And what would you go back in time and stop? So it's sort of a science fiction type story. But it also has heavy comedy elements in it, which I haven't done a lot of comedy in my work before. I tend to do sort of straight superheroes or horror stuff, so it's a new challenge for me doing this. So I'm doing that for a guy called Wayne Nichols, no relation. But he contacted me a little while back, and he's a TV producer out of LA.
Wow.
So he got in contact. This actually ties into the earlier question, because he wants to do this as a comic book and then spin it off into a film. And I've got a bit of a history of actually doing projects similar to that. I mean, I worked for Radical Comics for a few years, and their titles like Rider on the Storm and Federal Vampire Zombie Agency. And they've had great success turning their books into films. So things like Oblivion, starring Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
that was originally a Radical book, and also the Hercules one, starring The Rock. That was one of their books as well.
Right.
So so I've got a bit of a history of doing things that sort of like cross over between comics and film, and I guess for me it's a really cool thing because I love both mediums. Time Change, and then I've got another project called The Institute that has been a work in progress for like 3 years or so. It started out with the name College Hill, which was sort of a working title, but we've changed it up now to The Institute, and that's a Stephen King type psychological thriller story. So I've got pretty much 3 chapters drawn of that, and they're drawn and they're coloured by me, so it's like all the artwork done by me, and I've had a big hand in the lettering as well. So I want to get it's a 4-issue thing, so I want to get that all completed and published. We're talking to publishers at the moment about that. There's no shortage of things sort of coming up in the future.
Fantastic. And any idea if you will be able to get a chance to visit some of the ideas that you've had knocking around in your head for a little while and make them real and hopefully get them out there?
Well, I'm hoping so. That was one of my plans for Supernova, is to produce a print of the characters from Rumours of Whitmore and start to generate interest and kind of go from there. I it's one of those things where I'm always kind of working on it in small parts in the background, but unfortunately I spend so much time doing the commercial work that it doesn't leave a lot of time left over to do the personal projects. But hopefully, I say this at conventions a lot, as soon as I can, but hopefully later this year I'll have something to show,
Fantastic. So, in closing, what 3 things do you perhaps wish that maybe someone had told you when you were starting out in the comic book industry or just creating your own work that maybe might be of use to someone listening to this podcast who's kind of who is right now where you were back in the starting days? What 3 things would those 3 things be?
Okay. Well, they're probably not things that I would, I can't really think of anything that I wish I had known because I kind of figured it out and then sort of went at it. But 3 things that I'd say is, always remember the importance of like networking and connecting, and having personal relationships with the people that you want to work with or that you're working with, because that can lead to more work down the track if you have good relationships with the people that you're working with now. But also it's really important to get out there and network and connect with people if you want to get work in whichever industry. But, say comic books, since a lot of people are sort of working from their studios and that, they might neglect the importance of really connecting with other artists or writers or people from the companies. So the whole networking side is really important to getting somewhere and going places within comics. And any industry, really. Number 2, I guess, is to draw, like, all the time. Take a sketchbook with you and sketch, whatever's in front of you and just practice as much as you can. Because it's really easy for the skills to kind of slip if you're not keeping it sharp. So it's just one of those things where you got to constantly be studying and learning, and not just like, hey, I've got it all figured out. Because if you think that, you probably haven't.
Yeah.
Unless you do, I don't know, unless you're a genius and you do, but you probably haven't. I guess number 3, it could be anything, but I've got a bunch of comic books sitting in front of me, and if you want to do comics, it's a really good idea to use your comic book collection and the comics that you really like as a sort of library or repository of reference, not in the way that you sit there and copy the way a guy draws, some superhero girl, and he likes some way some guy does hatching or whatever, but there's a certain visual language that has been developed in comics, and so you can use the comics that you enjoy and that you've got as a really nice reference point, but then sort of spin that off into your own style. So definitely, study your favorite artists. Don't kind of like study everyone, just whatever takes your fancy and whatever you really dig. Spend time kind of studying that and learning from that, and then develop your own thing from that point.
Oh, okay. Now, you've left yourself open for another question here. As I heard the rustle as you picked up, as you touched your stack of reference comic books. What's in that? Tell us, what's in that pile? What have you got right next to you for reference?
Well, at the moment, I've got piles around me, and because I've got a shelf of just tons and tons of graphic novels and comics that I have sitting next to me. I mean, I own tons of comics, but these are my golden children, the ones that I love. What do you got? I've got a lot of the Batman Unwrapped books, so they're like Jim Lee's Hush or the Greg Capullo Batman stuff, but it's before it was inked or coloured, so it's all the pencil artwork. I've got Mike Mignola, Art of Hellboy. I've got Batman Judge Dredd, Judgment on Gotham by Alan Grant and Simon Bisley. I love that book, and of course, Batman Judge Dredd. I mean, it's
one of the most entertaining mashups that you're kind of hoping that someone will have the stones to try and make a movie out of, because, I mean, you know, Carl Urban is, I think everyone's going to want to see, if they do see a version of it, the Carl Urban version of Judge Dredd that was, you know, the R-rated movie from a couple of years back. And I guess they'd probably be fairly happy with, Ben Affleck as Batman, but, you know, I sort of want to...
that ever happening, but...
yeah, no, sadly enough, no. There'd be too many...
But there's an interesting story with that book, because it was one morning, and I was over at my parents' place, and I'd come downstairs, and I'd been thinking about that book, and I said to my brother, you know, I reckon the dream team of people to work with, like collaborators in a comic book, would be something written by Alan Grant and, you know, maybe Simon Bisley on covers or something like that. And then, like, no lie, 3 weeks later, I got an email by a guy named Andy Brown, who is based in Ireland, and he was starting his own publishing company, Berserker Comics. And he's good friends with both Alan Grant and Simon Bisley. And he wanted me to draw a comic series written by Alan Grant, and Simon Bisley did the covers for it. No shit. Yeah, that's what happened. Wow. It was total synchronicity, totally surreal. Yeah. So dream it and make it happen. Yeah, my friends.
Wow, that is incredible. And you know what? You can talk about the odds of that kind of thing happening, but let's face it, there is one guarantee. If you don't do anything about it, you can guarantee that the odds will be nil.
That's true.
So, you know, you never know. All right, well, look, we mentioned conventions a little bit earlier on. So tell me, what is your upcoming convention schedule?
Well, I'll be at Gold Coast Supernova in April. I believe that is the 8th and 9th, the weekend of the 8th and 9th. And then later on in the year, I think it's in August, I'll be at Sugar City Con in Cairns. Cairns?
No, Mackay.
Mackay, yeah. God, gotta get my towns mixed up. And I'll most probably be Supernova Sydney as well in June, but I haven't got that locked in yet. So that's pretty much it at the moment. I might do an appearance at Oz Comic Con in Brisbane, but the next one coming up is Gold Coast Supernova.
After having heard this episode of the Pay to Play podcast and finding out, as much about you as we can cram into one chat, which has been going for about an hour. That's fantastic. Okay, where can people find out more about you? Where can they go to get more of the Wayne Nichols experience?
Well, I've got my website, which is www.wnichols.com, and that's got lots of artwork, so, go and check that out. I've also got my Facebook page, which is Wayne Nichols Art. And I'm also on Instagram, Wayne Nichols _artist on that. And also on Twitter, Wayne Nichols Art. So I think I've pretty much got them all covered there.
Fantastic. All right then, well, Wayne, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and it's been great finding out about your combined career as a comic book artist and as an illustrator and storyboarder. So thank you very much for your time, and all the best for the future, and may it bring you everything you're hoping for and a whole bunch of other fun stuff besides.
Thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure.